about as the characteristic of Zora Neale Hurston talking about the characteristics of Negro expression. One is the will to adorn.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
To add beauty to, not just speak, but add beauty to speaking. So I want to play this clip because this is, you're talking about God and you are adorning the language about God. And so then I'll get your comment and then I want to ask you something else.
Okay. Where does God live? What is his address? Where can I get to God? Where do I find him? God lives in eternity. Eternity doesn't deal with geographical locations or addresses. God lives in eternity. And we live in time. Hey, I'm seeing all kind of folks I know as I preach. We live in time. I don't know whether the preacher eats chicken wings. God lives in eternity. Let's think about that. God lives in eternity, which transcends time. Time is a matrix inside of eternity. Think of time being something that God created, not subject to. In the beginning, there was God before there was a first day. So God existed before there was a calendar, before there was a watch, before there was a tick or a talk, there was God. Before there was a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there was God. Before there was an evening or a morning, there was God. Before the sun rose or set, there was God. Before the moon glistened against a dark sky, there was God. Before the first earthquake trembled in the ocean, there was God. There was God before there was an angel. There was God before there was a choir. There was God before there was anybody there to acknowledge him as God. God is God. God alone is God. And beside him, there is no other. God lives in eternity, and if you don't get that in your spirit, then your prayer life is going to go kaput because you're never going to understand being a creature of time with things like birthdays. You won't understand God. God doesn't have to get in a hurry because God doesn't get old. God doesn't get old because he's not subject to time. Anything subject to time gets old. Anything born out of time is ageless. That's part of being eternal. So when you start talking about being eternal, eternity supersedes time.
So my point is that to adorn, to add beauty, hyperbole, to make plain. So that's one of the characteristics. I think you do it absolutely marvelously. So just your comment.
You know, the reason I think that clip is important, I don't know how articulate I was, but to take the abstract notion of an invisible God and make it scalable for a finite mind becomes the responsibility of that moment. Because people have mistaken God for church. And I'm trying to get them to understand that God is bigger than church. He's bigger than religion. He's bigger than doctrine. He's bigger than theology. He's bigger than all the rules that we have made around him to incarcerate him. And we have a generation who doesn't make the distinctive between God and church, who doesn't really understand the notion of his absoluteness and his sovereignty and his ability and the fact that he is infinite and all embracing. And so it is my responsibility to bring the notion of God into the reach of the congregation. Where else would you find humans grappling with describing the indescribable? You could never describe him. If you could describe him, he would be God. But our meager attempts to articulate that cannot be described is yet our responsibility, that in the process of grappling with taking something that every metaphor you throw at it falls short of it. You know what I mean? Every word you learn does not complete it. And yet we must attempt to bring him within the purview of the congregation so that they can see some concept of God, so that they will stop idolizing their problems.
Yeah.
And so we make idols out of problems because we don't have enough people reminding us how big our God is. Then we would know how small our problems are. And so what you're seeing is me trying to describe the indescribable.
Yes.
That will always fail, but I'm failing in front of you in an attempt that you will walk out of there with a bigger view of God than you had when you walked in the room. And thereby, it's almost like sitting on the seashore and looking at the vastness of the ocean minimizes the problems that brought you to the shore. It's something about being around something that big shrinks whatever was on your mind. And so what I'm trying to do is give you the global view of the very notion of God. And then I am dealing with the congregation. We do 400 funerals here a year. So there's always somebody dying. Every day, while I'm talking to you, there's somebody, a member of my church just died. You cannot pastor on this level. It's different. It's massive. Yes. And there's always somebody grieving while there's somebody dancing. And so when I stand behind that desk, I have families, multiple families, whose grief is raw and bloody. And I'm trying to get them to see eternity versus time, so that they will not assault God's character because he snatched somebody out of time as if there were no eternity. You know, death is only a disaster because we're in time. If we were in eternity, it would be a reward. You know, time is an interruption of a bigger conversation in the annals of eternity. And if you saw that way, you would see the loss of your loved ones as a promotion. And so we have to keep reminding you from day to day that this is not it. And that's hard because we have all of these things to reinforce the notion that this is it, you know, and so we want it now, and we want everything now. We want everything to be done at a certain time because try all we can. The winds are against us when we're trying to tell you that there's something indescribable on the other side. And preaching is giving birth to a language that describes something that is totally beyond description. The abstract notion of God is such a daunting thing to bring down into a visual. You know, we talked about pictures and seeing pictures when we read. What does God look like, Daddy? You know, how big are God's hands, Daddy? If God wraps his arms around us, how long are his arms, Dad? You cannot quantify the depth and the breadth of God, but every Sunday we grapple with it in the hopes that we might plant some sort of seed that germinates in the hearts of men to grasp God's perspective in the story. We talked earlier about the different perspectives of the narratives when we look at the characters in the Bible. But then there's always God's perspective. And so when you bring God's perspective into the funeral, it's a birth. So God says that we should rejoice when they go and cry when they come. Cry because time interrupted eternity. Rejoice because the conversation now continues. And so bringing God's perspective into somebody's heart while they're grieving or hurting or worshiping, to understand that it's an insult to only talk to God about what he did rather than who he is. Because who he is trumps everything he did. If he never does, I tell him all the time, oh gosh, we can't do this. I tell him all the time, if you never do anything else for me, nothing else ever at all, I spend the rest of my life thanking you for who you are. for who you are, to bring that worship experience back to the church rather than this carnal, knee-jerk type of praise that we do now that's based totally around what he did. I'm having a good day, I'm going to church, I'm going to praise the Lord, I got a raise. You got to have a raise to praise God? If you take the whole job, if I end up homeless, if I have no shoes on my feet, to me, that goes into, that goes into something so much deeper. And because what I am out to do when I preach is to build relationship with God, not religion. I don't know about religion. I have issues with religion. I'm trying to get you to have a relationship with God. And so, like the servant who brings Rebekah to Isaac, I'm bringing you to marry somebody you've never met. So all I can do all the way home is describe him. Yes. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I know you do. Yeah. I'm just saying. But what we're dealing with is the frustration of an orator is to find words that will wrap around something that words will never reach around. Yes. Words will always fall short of it, and yet it is our job to have as broad a vocabulary, as creative a delivery as possible, knowing that at the end of the delivery it will fall short of him. But we must try, because we represent the body of Christ in the earth, and we must try to help the parishioner as well as the world to have some consciousness of God. If I have consciousness of God, it will affect how I treat you. My love of God ought to affect the way I handle his children. And there are certain things I ought not to bring myself to come in your house and shoot you and your kids. Because if I understand who you are to God, I don't have to know your name. You're one of his children. We're family. And we may not agree, or we may not even like each other, but if we understand who God is, when you get ready to raise your hand to assault me, you have to realize he loves me too. And you cannot love him who you have not seen and hate your brother who you see every day. You see what I'm saying? So it starts with loving God and knowing God, and I'm trying to build relationship so that people don't just come to the potter's house and see a building. That God transcends all of it. He was God in the storefront. Right. That's right. So that is the awesomeness and the agony of preaching. It is awesome because it is no feeling in the world like doing it, and there's no feeling in this world like being used by him in any given moment. It's just I can't. I've done all kinds of stuff. Nothing compares to it, and yet the agony is. All you have to work with for tools is word, breath, creativity, expression, articulation, intensity of expression. All of that together it's like trying to build a house with a mini tool set. And you got this little bitty hammer, and this little bitty screwdriver, and you're trying to build this big house with it. And if you come to the podium understanding the vastness of who he is, humility is impossible to avoid. If you understand, anybody who thinks this is easy never did it. They might have taught it, but they didn't do it. You have to do it to understand there are questions for which there are no biblical answers. There are situations that people get in today that we don't have a scripture for. There are needs that people have today that fall far short of any therapy or therapist or counselor or psychologist. There are people who come to you with agonizing problems. I had a brother the other day, he's born with a deformity in a very personal area of his life, and he was crying so bad when he told me about it that I started crying too. I can't fix him, but I can sit with them that weep. He's never had normal experiences that a man should have. and not by design, by birth. And I wept at the agony in his voice. The agony in his voice was deafening. If you have to be heartless not to hear the cry of the soul, and I have nothing to fix it with, but to tell him about God is all, and that this present life is temporal, and whatever you didn't get here is not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. So if you think you're smart, pastor, if you think you're good, pastor, it will humble you immediately. All that you know and all of your knowledge and all of your wisdom, people will still walk out of your church. They will still leave you with more degrees than a thermometer. They will still leave your church. They will still leave. They will still go out in the parking lot and blow their brains out after hearing you philosophize and quote all of these people. They don't care anything about that. They are trying to find an answer that will keep them from pulling the trigger. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And to all of it, you must be strong enough to keep walking. That's preaching. That's preaching.
I want you to unpack a phrase that we talked about, which is preaching is only one of the forms I communicate in. So can you talk about some of the other forms by which you communicate?
I see great synergism between producing a film and delivering a message. It's all storytelling. It is to give color to a script the way you give color to a text. So the text says, Lord, Sally, I don't know what in the world I'm going to do. Just lost my job. Can't believe they fired me. Me. After all I did for them, they fired me. And now I have nothing at all. How I express that as an actor is uniquely mine. When to take off the glasses is not on the script. When to turn your head and look away is not on the script. Nobody's going to give you that. You see what I'm saying? And so you have to bring color to the script the way you have to bring color to the text. So that's one thing. And so dabbling with that. Then there is the writing, which is so much different from speaking because you have time to contemplate your next phrase. If you took that much time in speaking, you would break the rhythm. And great speaking is like music, it has a rhythm. Great orators have a beat. And you can have a pregnant pause, but if that pause lasts too long, it turns to discomfort because a cadence has a rhythm. So you may not grab your best word in order to keep your timing. But when you write, you have time to think, and then a chance to rewrite, and then a chance to wake up in the morning and look at what you wrote the day before and say, what was I thinking? I didn't even explain that. So there's that opportunity but all of them, whether I went to Kenya, and all of my friends that are preachers, they think whenever you go someplace you went to preach, so they say, who you preaching for? And I said, well, nobody. I was invited by the Kenyan National Bank to do executive management training for their upper level staff. And I was in Kenya for 3 days and never saw, longer, a week, never went inside of a church. My whole last trip to Africa, I only spoke in Lagos, Nigeria, not in Durban, South Africa, or in Nairobi, because they brought me there for business and to talk to business leaders. But it's still communication. It's still communication. It's still relativity. It's still understanding the objectivity of what the audience is trying to accomplish within the organization, and strategically building an alliance and an opportunity for them to work together cohesively without getting in each other's way. And to be able to win that audience. Communication, for example, a moment ago when I was preaching and I said, I keep seeing people I know, makes me want to stop and eat chicken wings, and everybody started laughing. That statement is a part of being a great orator. The ability to humanize the moment, it's the same thing that makes a good movie good or a good presentation good. A good orator, a good presentation should have curves. It should have highs and lows. It should have moments that you wipe a tear and moments that you burst out laughing. It shouldn't be just one straight thing, because that's boring and it's ineffective. It should have texture to it, and it should have personality to it. Most preachers struggle to bring personality to the text. They assume a fictitious character when they get up to preach and turn into something that nobody recognizes. There we are on the cusp of time and the brink of eternity. As we stand on the brink of eternity, not knowing at which moment time will be no more. That's, that's all right. I mean, that's fine. We can do that. I can do that too. The thing about that, though, is in the era that we are now, people want somebody they can touch. And they don't want you to hide your personality. Because in a big room, the only way people get to know you is through your message. So I didn't know he ate chicken wings. Oh, he can be funny. Oh, he can be regular. Oh, I can relate to him. That is a part of preaching. Yeah. It is not a distraction from preaching. The same way when you tell a story and you're doing a movie and it gets really, really intense and there's a real gut-wrenching scene. If you notice a good movie, at the end of a good gut-wrenching scene, that when the cameras come up again, it'll be in a lighter environment. Because you cannot keep an audience in this mode for an hour and a half. So you preach. The worst thing in the world you can do as a preacher is to get up shouting and hollering, because you cannot climax a climax. You got nowhere to go. So if you start on the roof, the only thing you can do is go down, And the worst thing in the world is to get up behind somebody who really preach and the place is destroyed and you get up screaming behind them. Bring it all the way back down and then build your case. Build your own case, build your own foundation, create your own atmosphere. Nobody can create your atmosphere for you to work in like you can. That's right. You're right. Because you know what you need for what you're about to do, and you know where you're going. So I can't be at the mercy of the choir. I don't trust anybody like that. No, whatever they do, when they get to doing whatever they do, I'm still going to build my own wood. And so when you hear me joking about chicken wings waving at people, it seems abstract, but it's really intentional. Because it's creating an atmosphere with highs and lows and laughter and interaction and deep reflective thoughts like God, and then in the middle of it, chicken wings and potato salad. I'm taking you on a journey. I'm taking you on a journey, and a good message should look like the topography of property. Yeah. It should have peaks and valleys and hills and ridges and streams and brooks and dams and trees scantily scattered throughout the text in such a way that you look at the landscape of the message and you see a fuller picture of God because of it. And I think a lot of times we put on a personality to preach rather than to bring our personality through our preaching.
I want to go back to a comment that we have talked about, that in African American preaching, for example, there is the folk preaching tradition, and then there is an intellectual preaching tradition. You know, the folk preacher tended to be a hooper, master of metaphor, imagery. And the intellectual preacher, of course, erudite, quoting Shakespeare, quoting James Weldon, you know, and not that the folk preachers don't, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just drawing the lines out because I want to get your commentary. As a matter of fact, there's been a place in our history for both groups because for some of us, for a long time, we wanted to demonstrate that we were as intelligent, as brilliant, as smart, so we preached like that to demonstrate that we can do that. And another side of us where there was not access to the kind of formal education, and so we took that and mastered it. And there's been a tremendous bridge between folk preaching and intellectual preaching. And the stereotype is that the erudite preacher is all intellect and no emotion, and then the stereotype on the folk preacher side is the folk preacher's emotion but no intellect. And I think that those categories are not true, are not descriptive, are not accurate. It's looking at other people through a lens. So the best of our preachers have always combined both.
Right. Right.
And so I want you to talk about that because I think, well, go ahead.
I think it's not either or. I think it's both and. I think that the intellectual, formally trained preacher benefits from some of the things that the folk preacher has in terms of demonstration, illustration, and what we arrogantly refer to as emotionalism, to incarcerate the possibility that God could be effectively displayed outside of our institutions and organizations. There's an anger on both sides of the argument because both of them are doing something that the other one struggles to do. And so the best way to handle insecurity is to say, anything I can't do is wrong. But God proves to us in his selection of disciples that it's not either or, it's both and. You have an intellect like Paul and Apollos interwoven into the scripture. And then you have an unlearned man like Peter who does the inaugural message on the day of Pentecost. And God does not step away from either one of them. So the Jesus narrative in the selection of the people that he calls brings a diversity of people to the table and uses both of them according to where they are. The frustration with the intellectual is all of this learning and my church is not growing. So if this guy over here with less formal training is getting more numbers, he must be doing something wrong. And castigating him makes me feel safer. And the frustration of the folk preacher is the intellectual has something that I don't have, and so it must not be God, that God cannot flow through the intellectual. When I agree with you, I think that we behold the wonder of his glory, the only begotten of the Father, full of grace, which is anointing, and truth, which is fact. I think that you can't fully see Christ with all grace and no truth, or all truth and no grace. It's full of grace and truth that you behold the wonder of his glory. And if you don't have formal education, you have a responsibility to accessorize your experience with as much exposure to education and reading and studying as you can, because today we don't want to hear how you feel, we want to hear how you think. And if I hear how you think long enough, then you can bring in how you feel. But I don't want to hear how you feel if I don't get to hear how you think. That's just my view, okay? And on the other hand, unless I'm taking a class, I don't want to come to Sunday morning just to hear you think me down. You see, and it's all intellectualism, and I'm taking notes and I'm in class, but what spurs the soul to keep on living is not always the dispersion of facts and the quotes from intellectuals. It is, in fact, the passion with which the narrative is discussed sometimes is more valuable than the content itself. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it is how you said it, it isn't even what you said. And so you can't use all how and no what, or all what and no how. You have to breed them together. And to me, when I'm working on a sermon, I always feel like I'm weaving. I always feel like I'm weaving study and intellectualism with passion and creativity, trying to get the mix right. Trying to get the mix right.
That's right.
Trying to get the mix right.
That's right.
Not only does it make the experience better, it also makes your reach broader.
Yes.
Because I have all manner of fish, and I have to feed on all levels. And so I have to be able to vacillate from that which is descriptive to that which is factual, to that which is intellectual, to that which is experiential. And all of it has to happen within 45 minutes.
Right.
And that's a tall order. I have people sitting in my audience who teach at universities, who speak Greek, who speak Hebrew. I have people sitting out there listening like that. I have people out there who can't read. And all of them belong to God.
That's right.
And he told me to feed all of them. And so I have to study to feed one. I have to be creative to feed the other. My mother taught me that a great teacher can take anything and make it a chalkboard. Okay, so let me give you an example. When we were shooting, which movie? We were shooting a film with Angela Bassett, and there was a scene where she thought her husband was cheating on her, and she was sitting at the table having a drink, and when she put the glass down, the stem of the glass broke. It wasn't supposed to break. It just happened. Instead of saying cut and replace it, she took it and worked it in and threw it down and made it work. You understand? She made it work in the moment, okay? And so you have to be nimble enough to take something that happened and make it work in the moment. And some of those things are spontaneous. They can't be pre-planned. You don't know that lady in the third row is gonna start screaming right in the middle of your point. But you have to be able to take that and work that into the moment rather than let it be a distraction from the moment. Because if you allow her to control the narrative, you have lost control of the church. And if you have lost control of the church, what good are you leading it? It's like somebody driving who loses control of the car. They can be screaming in the back, but I can't throw my hands off the wheel. So at all times you have to be able to bring that in and work it into. I think we need both, is my point. And I think that we need a deeper respect for each other. And in order to have a deeper respect for each other, it begins with talking to each other and not about each other. You have academians who write papers on people they've never met and attack them fiercely just because they didn't live up to a formula that you made. God didn't make it. You or some dead preacher made it. And now we're handling it like if you don't do it like this, then you're a fool. Who wrote that? So we need to challenge what we call truth. Because we're not even talking about text now. We're talking about styles of preaching and what is considered intelligent or ignorant. Anything that I don't do is ignorant. That's arrogant. Because everything you were taught to do, you were taught to by a man who did it. And it became a rule because they said it, not because God said it. If Jesus preached today, he would not live up to how we teach people to preach. And it worked real good for him. You understand what I'm saying? So look at, to me, this is just the way I look at it. Look at the frivolity of humanity that we make rules that we made up and then castigate anybody who doesn't live up to the rule that was a rule that some dead man made, that this is the right way to do it. And now he's dead, and now I must live up to what he said. I would rather rewrite the rule and reformalize it and recreate it and let somebody live up to that rule, because neither his rule nor mine is God's. And so while it is interesting to learn and important to note, I think sometimes we give so much credence to that which we have created that we ignore what God has created. And God is showing us, I can use Peter and I can use Paul. Yes. And to every Paul who thinks he's eloquent, you will run into an Apollo who intimidates you. Right. You know, it was years before I read Corinth and read it within the book of Corinthians and read it within the context. Paul, now when I read it, sounds a little bit intimidated by Apollos. Mm-hmm. I came not to you with swelling words, nor excellency of speech, but in demonstration of the Spirit. Why are you defending yourself, Paul? Are you okay? Are you okay? Mr. Smart Guy who spoke all these different languages. No, Apollos came in there and had mesmerized the crowd with his intellectualism, and now Paul is defending himself because he's not seen as quite as intelligent. And this is the problem when you have treasure in earthen vessels. The contamination of the vessel sometimes get into the content that was poured into it, and you don't want your human insecurity to make you have to defend your ministry like that. You know, I came not at you with swelling words, nor excellency of speech, but in demonstration of spirit. I have no need of commendation. You are my epistles. You read a bit. Look at Paul having this big discussion. And some say that now when I read it in a completely different light because I read the text knowing that a man is insecure because another man has come to town and everybody's saying there of Apollos. And he said, one man planteth and another man watered that God gives. I mean, he's grumbling. It just sounds like he's on a therapist's couch. You know, it's going to be okay, Paul. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. But this is what I mean about rules and intellectualism. There's always somebody smarter than you. So if you're going to be intimidated by that, not only, it's easy to beat up on the guy that's below you, but when your Apollos comes to town, there's always somebody who knows something that you don't know. And it's not a crime not to know it. It's a crime not to want to. So there we are. If you don't know more than me, your classroom would be empty. So the only thing that makes you important is my ignorance. Because intelligence is only in contrast to something somebody doesn't know. So if you know more than me, I'm job security for you. Right. And don't let it irritate you that I got done more with less because I couldn't do any more than what God allowed me to do. And so some of us are called to teach it, some of us are called to do it, and most of us live in between those two extremities all of our lives. I think that a great message is a balance between intellectualism and spiritual demonstration. And when I talk to you, as I said upstairs, there is more to unite us than it is to divide us. All of your wealth of experience and intellectualism and training does not negate the fact that you come to the pulpit trembling just like I do and wonder, am I enough? And struggling to prepare your message and get your heart right because both of us have the impossible task of describing the invisible God. That's what it seems like to me. Yeah.
I want to talk about your preaching, and there are probably some basic kinds of questions. So I want to do one thing, and I want to put this as a marker. I want to put Joel Osteen. I'm not going to ask you the question about that, but I want to close with that question. Okay. So they can edit this out, but I want to close with Joel Osteen. So tell us about your preaching preparation method. How do you prepare a sermon?
A sermon germinates in me like a seed does in a woman's womb. It starts out on a cellular level, and it might be a note I scribbled in my phone. And the note is pregnant, but it hasn't developed yet. And then I'll read. Sometimes it's a thought, sometimes it's a text. It varies. And then if it's the text, I'll read everything around the text and try to understand the times of the text. And then once I've gathered all the information, then the challenge becomes to put it in an order that a diamond is only beautiful when it's set right. So the truth is the diamond, but it has to be set in a way that gives, I see people say great things in poor ways. And the hearer doesn't always get how great the statement is because you didn't set the stone right. You understand what I'm saying? So the answer only sounds important if you describe the question. So if you describe the question, you know, take the potter's house, go down to the potter's house, and there I will show you a work being wrought on a wheel, and you start talking about he made it again another vessel. He made it again another. How can it be it and another? It's it or another, but in this case it's it another. If it's it, it's either this glass is it or it's another. How can he make it again another? That is God all by itself. But what makes it powerful is to describe the contemplation and challenging the text to say, how can it be it and yet be another? And when did it happen? When did it become another, as seemeth good to the potter to make it? And what is the commonality between it and the other and the process is that it was all in his hands. Right. The shaping, the breaking, the remaking, the another, and the it were all in his hands throughout the whole process. So none of it is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. The it, the breaking, or the finality of the conclusion, because it was never a tragedy because it never escaped his hands. Mm-hmm. He never threw it away. So if you know, the message is I still got you, okay? So that's the subject, that is the text, okay? So I still got you. And so I'm, you know, and there I am grappling with, you know, the prophet goes down to the potter's house. And you would not think that something as mundane and uneducated as a potter would be a place God would send a prophet to learn. Mm-hmm. Which is back to what we were talking about earlier. And look at the oxymoron between the potter's house and the prophet. You would think that the potter would be going to the prophet to be taught, but God sends the prophet down to the potter's house because sometimes God brings profound truth out of ordinary things, and there he's staring at something, trying to see something. And as the message develops, we begin to see God using the very creativity that we just talked about to teach the prophet a principle through an illustration that he used metaphorically, okay? So when I'm staring at it, I may get the diamond first before I get the ring. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I get the ring and discover the diamond. Yeah. Most generally, if I have the diamonds, I will hide them until I get prepared to release them, because they're only beautiful when they're on the right fabric before them and encrusted in the crown I built for them. And that's my job, to make it important. And I think this is the part that's instinctive. Sometimes preachers don't know the diamonds from the ring. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they throw diamonds around like they were trinkets. Yeah. And the diamond doesn't have the impact on the audience because the preacher didn't set it right. It's like telling a good joke. One person can tell a joke and make you hysterical. Another person can tell the same joke and you just say, you know, and it's the same joke, but it's the timing, it's the setup, it's the turn of the head, it is the power of what I call the pregnant pause, of stopping. You know, and just freezing in the moment and letting the hearer's mind say what your lips didn't. Right. Because if I lead you right up to it, I don't have to say it. Your head said it, we shouted about it, and nobody even heard it because it happened in a spiritual way. All of that is a part of great preaching to me, and all of that defines how I get the text. And then to further try to illustrate this is the outline becomes the skeleton that I'm going to work from. I never walk to the pulpit with more than an outline because I'm not a manuscript preacher, and if I were one, I'm just not. And so I've got the outline, even if it's in my head, even if you never see it. I've always got. I am never preaching without an agenda. Or saying something that has nothing to do with where I'm going. It's just a matter of weaving it. The illustration I wanted to work from was the message, the Comeback Kid, that we had the clip of. My years of preaching that text was where Mephibosheth leads the discussion, and it was all about being God's crippled child. And that was all I saw. And then now when I preach the Comeback Kid, I'm watching David clear the way to the throne. And I'm seeing how strategic he was. And so my point is David is coming back to what he was anointed for. So on one hand, David is the Comeback Kid. But Mephibosheth is too. And so I don't bring Mephibosheth in until the middle of the message. And then when I bring Mephibosheth in, he's coming back to the house of Saul. And he's coming back to his father's inheritance. David is coming back to become the king of Israel, which he was anointed to be before. And both of them are comeback kids in a way. And all of us are comeback kids one way or the other. Then once I have knit those two stories together in a cohesive way, then the challenge becomes to make you see that you are in fact the comeback kid. And even if you're coming back on broken bones, even if you're just coming into what you were anointed for 10 years ago. And that weaving process goes on before I get to the stage. And what you're hearing is the recital after the rehearsal.
I want to push you on what you're doing is what I had a mentor, his name was Frederick G. Sampson out of Detroit, a great Baptist preacher. And we had dinner one Saturday night, and I said, Doc, you break every rule that I teach my preaching students. And he said to me, I stopped painting by numbers a long time ago. Right? So I'm asking you to paint by numbers. You're looking at the fine art. So I'm going to push you on questions like, does Bishop Jakes use a commentary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't say that, so I got to ask you, right?
Okay. I use everything.
Okay.
I use everything. Right. I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't want to leave that impression at all. Right. I read everything that everybody says, but I'm never bound by what they said. Right. I use old pulpit commentaries. Old pulpit commentaries that will have 10 or 20 theologians arguing over the same text. And I listen to what everybody says about it. And sometimes I will get threads of truth from any of them. And sometimes I don't use any of them at all, but I like to hear them grapple with it because the commentary to me becomes the friend I wish I had to discuss the text with. Yes. That's what the commentary is to me. Yeah. The commentary is to get to listen at what other people saw when they read it and why they saw it. And sometimes the why is in the original language. Right. And sometimes the why is in the topography of the landscape of the land and what was going on in that era and what was going on in the political regime around Rome. And they will introduce information elements that I didn't have. I absolutely use commentaries, but I don't just use commentaries. I use everything. I Google search. I read about things that are totally unrelated. I look for metaphors that are business related. I have over 50% of my church is either in business or entrepreneurs. And so sometimes I will use a corporate illustration to bring out a spiritual reality. And so I use everything to try to study word analysis, research, and most of the time, when I'm preparing a message, I am alone. And very seldom before I preach do I even like to hear music. In the car, no preaching in the car at all, please. I don't like to hear anybody preach in the car. I don't like to hear anybody sing anything in the car. I'm locked in my own head. And when I get to the church, there's oodles of people who need to see me before I make it to the pulpit. And I may have to do all kinds of television that morning and meet with the staff and talk about things that are unrelated to church or business or staffing problems or with their 300 employees in the church. I have to deal with all of that and still hold in my womb that message till I give birth. So I have to be able to compartmentalize the discussion I just had. One time I was served a subpoena by a magistrate as I got off the elevator to come in to preach. And there he is standing there to serve papers on me. He served papers on me. I shook hands with him. I handed the papers to somebody and walked in the church and said, "Good morning, Potter's House." You have to be able, if you cannot rule your own spirit, you're not like, you can't do this. If I had to walk out there on stage and say, "I don't know what the devil is trying to do this morning, but the devil is alive," you know, I can't do that. I have to be able to compartmentalize without aborting this. Until I deliver it, I risk aborting it. And I can't let you abort it, and I can't let me abort it. Until I deliver it, I have to protect this baby in the womb of my mind, and yet I can't stop life from going on around me. And so what I'm doing is clutching my knees together to hold that baby till I get to the stage where I can release it. And yet I have to be proficient on the way to the stage.
Question. One of the things that I noticed that space is very important in your preaching, and I attribute to you the major movement called what Martha Simmons, a friend of mine, calls from the pulpit to the stage. So space, and you walk, and so what's the relationship
between the walking?
Yeah, I mean, I know that you can preach standing behind the pulpit.
I can.
But you choose to, yeah, so what's the relationship?
It's because, it's so funny because I preached alone so long without a congregation, walking behind my mother's house in the woods, and sometimes pacing in her basement, that I have this proclivity between thought and walking. And when you see me walking, I'm behind the house again. Yeah. I'm behind the house again. And some strange habit that I can't even explain about playing with my coat. I play with my coat, twiddling with my coat subconsciously is me thinking in my head. When I hear myself preach, like you were playing clips, and they told me to turn around and look at it, I don't have to see me, because when I hear myself preach, I hear what I thought. I hear my head picking this over that, not this, not go there, not here, not now, move this over here. Like while I am preaching,
Composing.
Yes, I'm composing it.
You're composing.
Right in front of you.
Yes.
Right in front of you. And the weird thing is, Jamel, my television director, is doing the same thing backstage that I'm doing on stage. Camera number one, zoom in. Camera number two, back up. I'm doing the same thing while I'm preaching.
Right.
More of that, less of this. Move this over here, move that over there. Because some of preaching is spontaneous. And for me, and in that moment of preaching, there is that that relationship between the pulpit and the pews, and that cadence that exists in how we minister, that the congregation almost directs you to the spot. And you can feel all of that like a surgeon feeling for a knot. And so I'll say more of this. And sometimes, the other day, half my message I didn't get to use because I didn't need it. And you have to love the moment more than you love the message. That once God has accomplished what he's trying to do, he doesn't necessarily have to use everything you have planned, and you have to know when to give up, because if you don't, you will sacrifice the moment to get in the final 3 points of the message and lose the moment. And lose the moment is like aborting the baby. So you can't love what you prepared more than you love who you prepared it for.
Yes.
And so anyway, that's my answer.
I want to ask you, in traditional narrative, expository, topical, all of these kind of categories, how would you categorize your preaching in those terms, if not any of them, or maybe you have some other term that you've developed?
I think it's more expository. As a rule, I have done some topical preaching. The thing about me is I've had to be very versatile. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to be able to walk into different settings and be extremely versatile. I have to be able, if you tied my hands behind my back and anchored my feet to this chair, I could still preach. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I don't necessarily need physical movement to be able to preach. I just need my head and my mouth. Mm-hmm. In contrast that, if you handcuff my head and my mouth, freeing my hands wouldn't help me. Yeah. Because it's really about head and mouth. And for me, I can't be locked into one style of preaching because I go so many different kinds of places where you have to be able to morph into what is necessary to get the job done in that moment. I sat on the steps at Woman Are Loose and sat on the side of the steps until everybody thought I was kind of weird or something. And I kept looking up in the rafters, and I started talking about Christ waiting for the woman at the well. Mm-hmm. And the extreme mercy that's demonstrated in his patience in waiting for her to come. And that he waited for me while I was drunk. Mm. And he waited for me while I was high. And he waited for me while I was jumping around in the hotel rooms. And how he kept waiting for me to come. And he was a whale sitting on a whale, waiting for thirst to come. And you understand what I'm saying? So to be able to do that, I don't like to be locked into this is how I do it, which is what scared me about talking to you, because that may be how I do it Sunday, and the next week, I've started my message in the parking lot with a trunk load of trash and a camera out in the parking lot and preach junk in the trunk. And preach my way. I have started my message sitting in the crowd and talked about Jesus being in the crowd and John the Baptist was preaching. And that the story doesn't always start on the stage. The creativity with which and then if you're going to do something for 20-some years with the same people, you have to be creative. I mean, it's the same people every Sunday. It's not like being on the road. You can take 5 good sermons and go on the road for 2 or 3 years, okay? But when you're preaching to the same people and they remember, They remember. They write it down in their Bible or they got it in their notepad. Some of them know your sermons better than you do. And to be able to be creative enough, you got one book. You got one book for 43 years. You got one book. And you're talking often the same people that heard you preach I got people in my church that heard me preach my trial message. Literally, lots of people in my church that were there the first sermon I ever preached. And to be able to pull things out of the text in a different way has been my story. I think that expository preaching describes me more times than not, but I can be topical. If I'm teaching Bible class, I can be topical. I can do that type of narrative. I've never been locked into a system saying that this is me and no other, because the only thing that matters to me, the only thing that matters to me when I stand up is reaching you. And whatever will be the best way to reach you, you have to hear me. The only thing that matters to me when I mount the pulpit is reaching you. It does not matter how I feel. It does not matter that I just got off the plane. It does not matter that my ankles are swollen. It doesn't matter that my eyes are almost shut. If I mount the pulpit, the only thing that matters to me is reaching you.
Yes. I want to, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I want to ask you about criticisms of not being a social justice preacher or being a prosperity preacher. So how do I know you gave me some sense of that already it starts on the inside, but talk to me about your perspectives on social justice and then maybe prosperity preaching.
I think that social justice, it is hard to serve and oppress people and not engage in social justice, because I'm a voice to the people, but I'm also a voice for the people. My commitment to social justice is not my problem. My problem is the narrow definition that some people describe it in. They don't recognize social justice if it changes its clothes. As long as social justice carries a sign and has a bullhorn and does a march, they recognize it. They don't recognize that sometimes you can have a private meeting with the CEO and get more done than all the marching did. So whether you do it that way or this way, we are all trying to move in the same direction. And I think it is the old master's method to pit us against each other. To say, you light skinned, I'm dark skinned. You nappy headed, I got good hair. What is good hair? What is hair is hair. There's always been these little tricks that are used on us to put our energies on us rather than uniting us. Yeah. And I think for me, social justice is Tory, our Texas Offenders Reentry Initiative, and the 23,000 people who went through our program. Mm-hmm. To me, social justice is the personal letter I wrote to Governor Abbott as he got ready to execute Reed, I can't remember his first name. Robbie Reed. I wrote him, I know him, I wrote him. I don't like to talk about people I can talk to. So to impress you, denigrating and castigating somebody that I can pick up the phone and have a conversation with might impress you, but it didn't change things. So I think there has to be a commitment to social justice now more than ever, because the ugly head of racism has resurrected in a way that is startling and scary. I don't see how I was going to say, I don't see how you could be a person of color. I don't see how you could be a person of any color and not be concerned about the narratives that are going on in the world today and the rights of people that are being taken away. But Moses' method and Joshua's method of leadership were completely different, but they were for the same people. And I think that's an important thing to do. As it relates to prosperity, I think it's a funny discussion because they only label you that if you prosper. And often the person who's writing the book about your prosperity is selling that book like popcorn, trying to prosper. And so what it has become is fashionable to prosper off of killing somebody who's famous. And I have to understand that and accept that. But here's the other rub. I have to always be willing to entertain if there is any truth in my criticisms. And if there's something that I can learn from the criticism that makes me better, I do so. And I eat the meat and I throw away the bones. I never saw myself as a prosperity preacher. I see myself as an economic empowerment catalyst because I am trying to teach our people, not through magic, not through throwing $20 on the altar, but I'm trying to teach our people that there is a way to get up when a man won't let you up. I'm trying to demonstrate to them entrepreneurship, economic empowerment, financial literacy, second chance opportunities. I'm trying to demonstrate to them in my life and in my teaching and in my ministry that it is possible to get up. And this whole notion of prosperity preaching, there are people who deserve that description. But I am not one of them, because if you listen carefully at what I'm saying, that's not what I'm saying. I debunk the idea that faith without works will work. I am a strong strategic person about bringing our people in the room with people who did it so that they can hear and they can see, and to leverage what happened to me for the benefit of the people who followed me, and to be an advocate for them, whether it's in Washington, whether it's in corporate America, whether it's in the criminal justice system. I've been an advocate all kinds of ways. I hired 300 people. I hired more than the people who criticized me. Think about that. The people who criticized me didn't spend anything. 300 families eat out of this house, literally every day. Okay, some of which were homeless. Okay, then when you look at the vast body of our work and the fact that we have an office in the UK and that we have an office in Canada and that we've maintained a presence in different parts of the world, from an old country hillbilly living on a dirt road in West Virginia, that notion that you created jobs rather than demanded jobs from CEOs, okay, that you bought your own 18-wheelers, hired your own graphic arts designers, moved out the middleman, produce our own stuff, do our own social media, don't have to farm out any of the things that get done, and we did it all from us, FUBU, for us, by us. That's pretty good. And the truth of the matter is, in this season of my life, the challenge becomes finding somebody who has the business acumen as well as the theological depth to hand it to. Because a lot of people are prepared theologically, but they don't have the business acumen to run an organization of this magnitude. This is a huge organization to run, with a lot of responsibilities and a lot of properties and a lot of demands, and my normal is most people's nightmare. Yeah. So you understand what I'm saying? So a lot of times when we throw rocks across the pond and say things like that about each other, people love to have a label so they can use it to kill you with. When I came here, and I named the church the Potter's House. The members came to me and said, everybody wants to know, what kind of church are we? They said, are we Potter's House Baptist or Potter's House Methodist or Potter's House Church of God? What kind of church are you? And I was new and I was really trying to do this right. So I prayed about everything. I went to God and I said, God, the people want a name, a denominational name so that they can describe me. And the Lord spoke in my heart and said, don't give them a name, because anytime they get a name for you, they'll use the name to kill you. And when you start talking about names and labels, the way we describe people gives us something to kill them with. And I learned that. Having said that, let me say one other thing about that. None of that bothers me now. I mean, I honestly give it no thought at all. If you didn't bring it up, it would never pop up in my head, because I know who I am. And when you know who you are, people calling you a name doesn't bother you, because I know they're not talking to me. They're talking to who they think I am. And most of the time, with proper education, I can help them. Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. With proper education, I can help them to rethink how they describe me. Yeah. Because there is something dangerous that came over on the boat with us. It's tribalism. And you have to get in a tribe. And once you get in a tribe, they then choose who you're fighting against. Yeah. And a lot of the people, being naive when I first stepped on the scene, a lot of the people who gave me the hardest time were people I admired. And I didn't know we were enemies until they shot me. I was laying on the floor. I said, "Oh, we fighting." I really didn't. This is true. I didn't know it. I had to catch up with it. I assumed that we would be brethren. I assumed that you would call me. I assumed that you would ask me or talk to me. And I had to learn that that's not how it was. A lot of naivety falls along the way. Yeah. At this point, I very seldom run into those types of descriptions because there's too much evidence to dispute it. You would have to look past over $500 million worth of film I did to just say I'm taking church money. You'd have to look past films you watched. You'd have to look past the body of work I did on television, Lifetime and talk shows and stuff like that. You'd have to look past the 19 weeks of being on the New York Times bestsellers list to reduce me down to somebody with no more talent than a manipulator. You see, you would have to go blind to the body of work that I've done. You would have to ignore that I sat with the last 3 presidents and heads of state around the world and counseled people in crisis through trauma and all kinds of stuff, and just say, he's somebody up here trying to get a suit. After a while, the criticism becomes so ignorant that the person is ashamed to put their face behind it. Yeah. So the only thing you get now is an uninformed tweet or text here or there from somebody from a barbershop, because most people by now have figured out that I'm a different kind of nut. I am an absolutely different kind of nut. And to trivialize me is to simplify something that's very complicated for your own self-aggrandizement. Yes.
What would you like your legacy to be?
Lord, as my grandma would say, Lord, child. I'm working on that now. And I can say this much. In the fall of my life, if that's where I'm at, I would like to see the word made flesh in the things I leave behind. It is not about preaching somewhere or speaking for someone or doing anything. It is about taking the things that I taught and that I stood for and leaving tangible evidence in the earth. It is in the Jake's Divinity School. And the hope that I have of leveraging my influence to leave an institution that embraces the ideologies that I stood for. It is in real estate development so that our community can have opportunities without being house poor, so that they don't buy houses so big that they can't buy furniture in them, so that they can have gas in the car that they bought, so that they can understand economic empowerment. I feel more like a messenger of Moses than just a preacher. I have the weight of the gospel, but I also have the weight of our people and their oppression and their struggle on me. And I want to reproduce after my own kind. I want to see them achieve. I want to see them come up. I want to see us tell our own stories and build our own companies and own our own businesses. And I'm tired of begging other folks to give me a chance. I'd rather make my own chance and let them beg me. And I've seen that happen. And I know that can be done. And I know that if we put our efforts together or our finances together or our talents together, we can do anything. But we have been trained to think that the only way we can get up is at the mercies of some other people. Yeah. And I just rebuke that with everything inside of me, that it may be harder, it may be tougher, it may be longer, we may have to go different roads, but at the end of the day, we are the people we've been waiting on. And you understand what I'm saying? And I believe that. And I don't believe that my future is in the hands of somebody who hates me. I just don't believe it. Ooh, excuse me. Oh, God. I just am not going to spend my life begging somebody to give me a shot and give me a chance and give me a job and give me a nothing. Move out of my way. Move out of my way. And maybe you're not going to hire me. I may end up hiring you. Move out of my way. Move out of my way. I believe that I am fearfully and marvelously made, that I am gifted and bright and talented, and I believe that I can create my own place in the world if you just step aside. And if you don't step aside, I might step over you because I am relentless at 62. And I want my children to be relentless. I want my sons and daughters to be relentless. I want my congregation to be relentless and tenacious. And I wanted them to know we can do anything. We can build neighborhoods. We can build communities. We can build schools. We can build malls. We can build anything. We can build businesses. We built the White House. We can build the Black House. We can build anything. I absolutely mean it. I absolutely mean it. And you don't have to feel sorry for me because I'm black. You don't have to have mercy on me for it. I'm not going to apologize for my skin. I like my skin. I like the smell of my sweat. I like the nappiness of my hair. I appreciate all people, but I am not ashamed of being me. I am not ashamed of being me. I appreciate anybody who knows me knows I respect all people and all cultures and all that, but I think that we have been trained to apologize for being who we are, and we have been trained to wait on somebody to come give us something that is not coming. And so if you want to call that message prosperity, I can live with it. Because at the end of the day, I do want to prosper. If you want to castigate me and criticize me for wanting to see my people live in nice homes and send their kids to good schools and be able to have the same opportunities that anybody else had, go ahead and throw that rock at me. But I don't get the luxury of being what I think of as a prosperity preacher as long as we are still making half the money that our white counterparts do. I don't think we're nowhere near prosperity level yet. So we're just trying to get to normal, okay? We're just trying to get to justice. We're just trying to get to right. We're just trying to get to opportunity. We're just trying to get to being respected for singing the way we sing, moving the way we move, dancing the way we dance, feeling the way we're just trying to get to the point that you don't get to set the benchmark on what is right for America. That's where I stand. And I honestly, truly doesn't bother me what other people say, one way or the other, because as a leader, you have to be stronger than that, than to acquiesce to somebody who's throwing rocks at you, trying to talk people out of loving you who have already loved you. Yeah. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to talk people out of loving you. This is why you should not love this person. This is why you should not go to that church. This is why, and I think our people are smarter than that. They go where they want to go. They go to where they want to go. They follow whoever they feel akin to, and I stopped being threatened a long time ago by people who were trying to talk people out of following me that God sent to me. I'm cool with it.
I want to go back to preaching just for a moment. How do you close your sermon?
It depends on what that sermon is designed to do. Sometimes the highlight of the sermon is the altar call. Sometimes for me, closing the sermon is a celebrative moment. Every sermon doesn't end with a close the way black preaching traditionally looks at closing, like with a hoop and a close. I find, just my experience, that's not as important as it used to be.
Tell me about it.
I don't think our people need you to sing them to sleep. And millennials in particular don't understand why you're singing, why you preaching. Why is he singing? I got different nationalities and different cultures who don't understand why we sing when you ought to be talking.
It's called a hooping.
Yeah, I know, but they call it singing. Yeah. Now, I respect it. I like it. I enjoy it. I appreciate it. I'm from an era that relates to that and understands that. And when I get ready to do that, and if I feel like doing that, I'm going to do that. But I'm not going to be locked down to evaluating the success of the message by the sound of the word. Whether you say, let there be light, or whether you hoop, let there be light. The real issue is there light? So I think the millennials in particular are bottom line people. They want you to talk to them. They want you to make sense to them. They want you to appeal to their logic. They want you to be reasoned and reasonable. And then once you do that, if you celebrate, they'll celebrate with you. But they're still, and the reason I think it's important, you're laughing at me, but the reason I think it's important is I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor. But what I found out when I started pastoring is that a lot of our people need fathers. And sometimes I will sacrifice the preaching moment to have a daddy moment. To talk to you like your father should have. To challenge you. A lot of our pain doesn't start in the church, it started in the house. And again, I never sought to be a great orator. I just wanted to help people. And whatever I have to morph into to help people, that's really my goal. I learned while I pastored. I had we do a big thing for Mother's Day, and we always buy some gift for the mothers. A little gift, but when you buy that many thousands of them, it's quite expensive. And we decided we were going to do the same thing for fathers. So one year we bought these boutonnieres for all the fathers, and everybody was supposed to pin a boutonniere on their father. And then I realized that most people didn't have a father to pin it on. Little boy got up, walked up front, and pinned me while I was standing there. He said, "You're the only father I have." And one by one, grown men and women started coming up till I was covered with roses. Now, what they didn't know is that in the emotionalness, the emotional outpouring of the moment, they were sticking the pins into my flesh. So I am literally bleeding under my clothes, and I still didn't stop them from pinning it. Because it was worth the pain to provide the moment. And being what people need is always painful. And there's always a bleeding that they don't see. And so it wasn't strange to me that I was bleeding under my clothes, because I've always been bleeding under my clothes. And it's a good illustration of what ministry is at its best. It's that the roses they pin on you creates bleeding in places they do not see. And yet we stand there and we wear the rose, and when we get home, we wipe the blood.
I was thank you. I was laughing. One of the funniest times and prideful times that I saw you preach was when I turned on, you were preaching on Joel Osteen, Treasure in Darkness. And a Hammond B3 was sitting. You know, he's got that globe that turns. And I said, he's getting ready to hoop today. There's a Hammond B3. So can you just tell me about that? Because that didn't get there by accident. You intended that to happen.
Well, they put that there because, first of all, I think Joel Osteen has almost every message I've ever preached in his library. And I wouldn't have believed that if I hadn't seen it. I mean, right back to VHS days. And the second thing is, though he doesn't preach my style nor me, he does have a great respect for it. The third thing is, the very first time I came there, it was quite a moment because Joel Osteen's church looks like the United Nations. It's Eastern Indian people in there, and Jewish people in there, and Asian people in there, and white people and black people, all in one place. And if you walk up there and grab that mic and begin to minister to them, you have to reach them where they are.
I got you.
Where they are.
Yes.
And connect with them and then bring them where you go.
Right.
Okay. But the art, the great art of being a great orator is to meet the room where they are. Which means if there's going to be any movement, it's got to come from you, you know, and to meet them where they are, and then to bring them to where you're trying to bring them in the spirit is my assignment. Whether the best tool is a joke or a quote or an expository glance at a text or a personal testimony, doesn't matter what you use. You may have to use all of them to get there. The other thing is, to me, when I climbed on his stage, and years ago, John Hagee's, and down through the years, Pat Robertson's, and when I climbed up on that stage, every other black preacher in the country climbed up there with me. And I knew that I represented all of us. And it was an honor to stand there and do something other than sing. Because we've been singing for other folks a long time. We've been singing for other people a long time, but to speak and teach has been a bridge too few have crossed. I applaud the courage of the white leaders that would invite a person of color into that atmosphere and the humility through which they serve. But I do not think that inviting me is a favor. I think you invite the anointing you respect. And if you don't respect me, don't invite me. And so I didn't feel like I was auditioning, nor did they make me feel like I was auditioning. They were willing to embrace my style to get my substance. And it's my job to make sure that I have enough substance to justify my style and to introduce them to the way we do, and to become a point of reference for others who would come behind me until it ceased to be strange. And also them to us, because that road is a two-way street. And we have to learn to broaden our definition of great preaching to incorporate people whose voice inflection is different from our own. Yes. Because then we become what Christ prayed, that the body of Christ might be one. Yes. That means that you have to have enough elasticity in your preferences to embrace our differences while accentuating our commonalities.
Well, I just want to say thank you for just opening and being so available. You, man, thank you.
See, the real work is going to come later, because he has to take all of this and put all of this into some academic language that's going to represent several chapters in the book that I'm writing, Don't Drop the Mic. And though we've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years, I decided to let him have the hard part of explaining my madness. I went crazy for a long time trying to think, oh God, I don't think I'm gonna do that. And, you know, how do I explain that? And how do I describe that? And how do I articulate that? And then I thought, I'm not gonna worry about it. I'm gonna let you worry about that. I'm gonna send you examples of what I do. I'm gonna answer any questions you have about what I do. And he's gonna develop academic language about it that explains me to his friends. And, and he's going to try to make me orthodox to what they expect. And I'm looking forward to reading what you write. I know I'm serious. I'm really serious about it. I'm looking forward to reading what you write, because he convinced me that having academic language around what I did was important for generations to come. And so I would hate to die and not leave a recipe.